Today we will learn about the role of yeast in food industry. Yeast is utilized in fermentation of food and beverages. It is also used as an additive and ingredient for food processing. Yeast is also responsible for spoilage of food and beverages. Yeast is also used as a biocontrol agent against the spoilage microorganism. The role of yeast as a probiotic and biotherapeutic agent is also known. Yeast is also found to be a food allergen. Now, let us know what is the role of yeast in the food industry. As you know, the term yeast was derived originally from a Dutch word gist, which refers to the foam forming ability during the fermentation of beer wort. Similarly, the French word levure refers to the role of yeast in causing the bread dough to rise. Yeast are ubiquitous in nature. These are unicellular fungus belonging to the fungus family Ascomycetes. The most common yeast belonging to the genus Saccharomyces play a key role in food fermentations. The genus Saccharomyces cerevisiae is the most common yeast in fermented foods and beverages. Yeast are also known for both beneficial as well as non-beneficial effect. Some of the yeast acts as spoilage agent in food and beverage industry. So, let us see what are the conditions necessary for the growth of yeast. Yeast require oxygen for growth. Some yeast are able to ferment sugars to carbon dioxide and alcohol even in absence of air and produce ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide from simple sugars. These simple sugars can be glucose or fructose or any other source. They are active on a range of temperature. The temperature range of their activity is 0 to 50 degrees Celsius, but their optimum growth temperature is mesophilic range, that is 20 to 30 degrees C. Yeast grow in a wide range of pH of 4 to 4.5. They are also able to grow at 40% sugar concentration. They require a minimum water activity of 0.85 or a relative humidity of 88%. So, students, let us know the role the yeast play in food industry. Yeast is used for the fermentation of food and beverages. It is an additive ingredient in food processing. It is responsible for spoilage of food and beverages. Yeast also acts as a biocontrol of spoilage microorganism. The role of yeast as probiotic and biotherapeutic agent is also established. The yeast are sometimes also a source of food allergens. The most common use of yeast is for alcoholic beverage production. As you know, alcoholic drinks are classified as wines and beers. Wine are made from the fermentation of soluble sugar present in the fruit juices, whereas beers are made from the fermentation of starch-rich cereal grain. Beer, whiskey and vodka are produced by the fermentation of grain starches that have been converted to sugar by the activity of enzyme amylase. Let us see what are the 5 basic steps in the production of grape wine. The first step is harvesting. Harvesting is the first step for wine making process. The grapes are taken to the winery, they are sorted into bunches and the rotten and underripe grapes are removed. The second step is crushing and pressing. The sorted and destemmed grapes are crushed by mechanical process and converted into a form which is known as must. Must is freshly prepared grape juice that contains the skins, seeds and solids. The next step is the fermentation process, wherein the must undergo natural fermentation within a period of 6 to 12 hours by airborne wild yeast. The fermentation converts the sugar to alcohol and the wine is produced. The final step is the clarification and aging. Clarification is the process wherein the solids such as the dead yeast cells, tannins and proteins are removed, and this step is followed by aging and bottling. Aging and bottling follows the clarification process wherein the wine is aged. Aging the wine in oak barrels produces a smoother and more vanilla flavored wine. It increases the wine's exposure to oxygen. Steel tanks are commonly used for zesty white wines. Another common use of yeast is for coffee bean fermentation. Coffee beans undergo natural indigenous fermentation and a diversity of yeast species are involved in the fermentation. These yeast assist in the degradation of the bean pulp and contributes to the aroma and flavor of the coffee. It also enhances the antioxidant activity of the final product. Yeast is also used for cocoa bean fermentation. Cocoa bean fermentation is mediated by a sequential action of yeast and lactic acid bacteria followed by acetic acid bacteria. The end product formed is the chocolate. The process aids in the fermentation of raw cocoa bean to yield flavor precursors of chocolate production. The most important activity of the yeast is the production of alcohol ethanol from the carbohydrates. Carbon dioxide and glycerol are also produced as a side product. The common yeast species active in the fermentation are Cleveromyces species, Hansaniospora and Pichia. The lactic acid bacteria, Lactobacillus species and acetic acid bacteria like Acetobacter species and Gluconobacter species collectively bring about the fermentation process. Lactic acid bacteria and acetic acid bacteria results in a well fermented fully brown cocoa beans. It is also interesting to know that a number of non-alcoholic beverages are produced by the action of the yeast. These contain a minimum amount of alcohol and they are rich in carbon dioxide. Some examples are root beer, kvass, kombucha, kefir, kumis and mubi. The traditional use of yeast for vinegar production has been known to mankind since a long time. Vinegar, which is nothing but sour wine, is produced as a result of mixed fermentation which is carried initially by the yeast but followed by the acetic acid bacteria. The bacteria Acetobacter depend upon the yeast to produce an easily oxidizable substance, that is ethyl alcohol. The function of the yeast is to break down the glucose or carbohydrates into alcohol, primarily ethyl alcohol, with the liberation of carbon dioxide. An alcohol concentration of 10 to 13% is ideal for good vinegar fermentation process. Alcohol concentration lower than 13% results in oxidation of esters, and acetic acid result is a low yield of vinegar. Indigenous vinegars produced by the spontaneous fermentation of substrate is very slow and the product formed is of inferior quality. Any substrate such as apple, pears, grapes, honey, syrups, cereals, hydrolyzed starch, beer and wine can serve as a substrate for the yeast fermentation during the vinegar production process. Yeast are also utilized in the dairy. Yeast mediated fermented milk products such as kefir and kumis are quite popular. The yeast contribute to the flavor and texture development, and the important species in this process are Debaryomyces, Yerovia species, Cluveromyces and Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Yeast are also important during the fermentation of the meat products. For example, for the preparation of sausages and for the maturation of hams. Some species of yeast such as Debaryomyces, Yerovia, Candida are involved and they contribute to the flavor and color development of the meat product. Traditionally, sourdough has been consumed by different civilizations, and sourdough bread is made by the fermentation of dough using naturally occurring lactic acid bacteria and yeast. Yeast strains isolated from sourdough fermentation are Saccharomyces cerevisiae and Pichia species. Sometimes there are mixed fermentations which involve participation of yeast and lactic acid bacteria. Many of the natural fermentations are an example of the collective activities of yeast and lactic acid bacteria. Yeast play an important role in the production of beverages due to their ability to accumulate high levels of alcohol, ethanol, and thereby they contribute to the aroma of the compound, while lactic acid bacteria contributes to the desirable acids, flavor compounds and peptides that inhibit the growth of undesirable microorganisms. The mixed fermentations primarily are utilized for the production of different type of beverages. The contribution of lactic acid bacteria in the fermentation of beverages is to produce organic acids, aromatic compounds and also to decrease the pH, thereby inhibiting the growth of the spoilage microorganisms. The mixed fermentation results in an improvement of the aroma besides high level of ethanol production. Yeast are also used as single cell protein. Single cell protein refers to edible unicellular microorganism and they are considered as an alternate to the protein. The yeast species commonly utilized for SCP production are Candida, Hansenula, Pichia, Torulopsis and Saccharomyces. It is also used to solve the protein malnutrition which is so prevalent in the world. The commonly used species of yeast for single cell protein are Saccharomyces cerevisiae and Candida utilis. The use of yeast as a nutrient source is also referred as nooch. It provides a non-animal source of protein that contains all the 9 essential amino acids. Nutritional yeast are widely regarded as a good source of vitamin B, including vitamin B12. Both nutritional yeast and brewer's yeast are a type of yeast called Saccharomyces cerevisiae. These yeasts synthesize bioactive compounds that can serve as antioxidants, for example, glutathione. The role of yeast in spoilage of food is also known, and they are responsible for objectionable odors, appearance, taste, texture, or they are responsible for build-up of gas in the packaging containers. As a result, there is loss of the quality of the product. Food spoilage by yeast occurs in those products where the bacterial growth is either retarded or checked by some chemical or physical method. Fermented dairy products and salted meat products are highly susceptible to yeast spoilage. Similarly, psychrophilic, that is low temperature tolerant yeast like Cryptococcus and Rhodotorula species can spoil the frozen meat, poultry, seafood and other product stored for long period at low temperature. Other category is the osmotolerant yeast species, for example Zygosaccharomyces and Debaromyces, which are responsible for the spoilage of food products having a very high sugar or salt concentration. The use of yeast as probiotic and biotherapeutic agent is also gaining popularity. Yeast species such as Saccharomyces cerevisiae variety Bollardi is a probiotic species for human consumption and is effective for treating gastroenteritis. The human intake of probiotic yeast can be either by fermented foods or through oral administration of lyophilized cultures. Some yeast like Willopsis enhances the survival of 2 probiotic bacteria, namely Lactobacillus bulgaricus and Lactobacillus rhamnosus in fermented milk. The use of yeast enhances the stability of the probiotic bacteria in the fermented milk, and thereby it extends the product shelf life and also retains the nutritional value. The use of yeast as biocontrol agent is also gaining popularity. Some yeast are known for the secretion of antimicrobial compound and release such a killer toxin which is known as mycosins. Mycosins are extracellular proteins or glycoproteins that disrupt the cell membrane function of susceptible yeast. The antibacterial activity of the yeast Debaromyces against Clostridium has been reported. It has been attributed for extracellular and intracellular antimicrobial compounds. Therefore, the use of antagonistic yeast starter cultures contribute to the product safety primarily by inhibiting pathogens growth during the fermentation process. So, students, let us conclude. Yeast are single-celled fungi belonging to the family Ascomycetes. They have been used in the food industry and their usage is multifold. The most common yeast belonging to the genus Saccharomyces play an important role in the food fermentation. The genus Saccharomyces cerevisiae is a common yeast in fermented food and beverages. Yeast are known for both beneficial as well as non-beneficial effects. Some yeast act as spoilage agent in food and beverage industry, whereas some yeast are utilized as single cell protein to nourish the protein deficit populations. Thank you.